Rain falls softly against the window of a cramped apartment, where the glow of a single desk lamp cuts through the darkness. The low hum of a recording mic flickers on, followed by a trembling voice. Lina Torres, 29, a late-night podcaster known for her true crime series, Gone Silent. Her voice is warm, intimate, but edged with exhaustion. She starts tonight's episode differently, slower, quieter, as if afraid someone might be listening. She says she wants to tell a story that's haunted her for years, a story she's avoided because she can't stop dreaming about it. The story of Eli Mercer, a man she once knew, a man who vanished into the wild and never came back. Lina describes him not like a case file, but like someone she can still see when she closes her eyes. The restless smile, the endless curiosity, the way he said nature was the last honest thing left. The sound of faint static fills the background, an accidental hiss from the old recorder. She clears her throat, uneasy. Eli disappeared 3 years ago during a solo hike through Oregon's Crater Trail, a sprawling wilderness where fog seems to breathe. He was an amateur filmmaker, documenting his journeys through abandoned trails and unmarked routes. His last footage, recovered weeks later from a water-damaged GoPro, became infamous online. 7 hours of silent hiking through moss-covered pines, until the last 2 minutes turned strange. Lina plays an audio clip from that recording. Faint crunching footsteps, his breathing steady, wind rustling leaves. Then, beneath it, something else. A whisper, so faint it's almost a trick of the static. Turn back, it seems to say. Eli keeps walking. The wind grows louder, the camera shakes, and then there's nothing. Lina pauses the clip, letting the silence stretch. Her breathing quickens as she explains she's analyzed that footage countless times, trying to understand if it was the wind, an echo, or something else that spoke. She confesses that Eli was more than just a story to her. They met in college. He inspired her to start her podcast. And the day before he left for that trip, he'd called her. Said he found something in the woods he couldn't explain. The way Lina tells it, there's guilt in every word. She never called him back. The next morning, his car was found at the trailhead, doors locked, keys inside, and his pack missing. Search teams combed through the forest for weeks but found only fragments. A boot print near a dried creek, a torn strap from his camera bag, and his GoPro, half buried in mud. The footage cuts off suddenly at 2:16 p.m. The timestamp glitches. It jumps backward. For a single frame, Eli's reflection appears in the lens, but his mouth isn't moving, and the whisper repeats. Lina's voice begins to tremble. She says she's been having dreams lately. A fog creeping under her door, of footsteps outside her apartment. She tells her listeners she'll be playing a piece of unreleased audio next, one she's never shared before. Her hand hits the keyboard. The faint click echoes. A distorted sound bleeds through the speakers. Static, followed by a distant male voice, muffled but unmistakable. It's not the woods. It's what's inside them. Lina exhales sharply, cutting the audio short. Her tone shifts, defensive, shaky. She says maybe it's just a corrupted file, a glitch in the recovery process. But then she admits she found something else. The file's metadata shows it was last modified 1 week ago. Her voice lowers to a whisper. She says she didn't touch that file since the day she got it. The rain outside grows heavier, beating against the glass like restless fingers. The room hums with white noise. She tells her audience she doesn't know if she should continue. But then she laughs nervously, forcing composure. It's just a story, she says. It always is. She takes a slow breath, presses stop on the recorder. But before the audio fades, something faintly clicks in the background. A second mic turning on. The static lingers like breathing. And just before the sound cuts completely, her whisper returns. But the footage didn't end when he vanished. The rain has stopped, replaced by the low hiss of tires over wet asphalt. Somewhere along Route 66, a neon sign flickers against the empty night. Vacancy glowing in broken red letters. A lone sedan pulls into the gravel parking lot of the Desert View Motel, its headlights cutting across rows of identical, aging doors. Inside the car, Harold Vance checks his watch. 48 years old, divorced, a man used to the road. He's driven from one town to another for nearly 2 decades, selling auto parts to mechanics who barely remember his name. He's the kind of man who blends into every diner, every gas station, every crowd. But tonight feels heavier, as if something unseen is following him just out of sight. The motel office is cramped and dim. A single fly buzzes beneath a dying fluorescent tube. Behind the counter, an old woman looks up from a crossword puzzle without smiling. Her eyes are clouded but sharp, her tone curt when she asks for his ID. "You're the only guest tonight," she mutters, sliding the key across the counter. Room 9. End of the hall. Harold forces a polite grin, takes the key, and walks into the cool desert air. The hallway smells faintly of mold and old cigarettes. A radio hums somewhere behind a thin wall, an old tune warped by static. Inside his room, everything feels still, too still. The bed is neatly made, the television ancient, and the lamp buzzes like a trapped wasp. He sits on the edge of the bed, rubs his temples, and tells himself it's just another night on the road. But the silence presses down like a weight. He opens his laptop, answers a few emails, and leaves a voicemail for his daughter. "Made it safe. Talk tomorrow." His voice cracks slightly. He doesn't notice. At 11:47 p.m., he steps outside for air. The desert stretches out forever, the horizon painted with faint lightning in the distance. He smokes in silence, eyes tracing the empty highway. Somewhere in the distance, a payphone rings. One sharp, echoing ring. He waits for another, but it never comes. The sound of wind slides through the parking lot like a sigh. He turns back toward his room and freezes. The door he left slightly ajar is now wide open. Inside, the light flickers violently. The television has turned on by itself, showing only static. He steps closer, heart pounding. The air feels colder, damp, as if the room had been rained in. He calls out, "Hello," but his voice feels small against the white noise. For a moment, something moves in the reflection of the screen, not behind him, but beside him. A dark outline, human-shaped, but distorted. The screen flickers, and it's gone. He blinks, rubs his eyes, mutters that he's overtired. He shuts off the TV, locks the door, and lies back down. The hum of the neon sign outside fills the silence. His breathing slows. The camera, had there been one, would have captured his body relaxing, then his brow furrowing slightly. His eyes open. The hum has stopped. The light from the window is gone. The clock on the nightstand reads 3:17 a.m. Harold sits up, disoriented. The lamp won't turn on. He fumbles for his phone. Dead. Even the sound of wind is gone. It's as if the world outside the room doesn't exist anymore. He moves toward the door, barefoot, every step creaking. When he opens it, he's met with a wall of black. Not night, not darkness, just nothing. No stars, no parking lot, no air. He shuts the door quickly, trembling. He stands in the center of the room, listening. For a second, he thinks he hears something breathing on the other side of the wall. Slow, deliberate, in sync with his own. The next morning, the motel looks the same as always. The sun burns against the cracked paint and the rusted vacancy sign hums weakly. The maid knocks on room 9 twice before unlocking it. The bed is neatly made, the curtains open. Harold's suitcase sits in the corner, untouched. His wallet, keys, and phone rest on the table, as if waiting for him. But Harold Vance is gone. The police arrive that afternoon. They interview the owner, who insists she saw him checking in but never leaving. The security cameras, old VHS systems, offer nothing. The feed for room 9's corridor cuts off at exactly 3:17 a.m. The tape shows Harold walking toward his door, pausing, then turning his head sharply as if someone had called his name. The sound is muted. He steps forward, disappears through the doorway, and the camera flickers to black. Weeks later, detectives play back the footage again. This time, they slow it down frame by frame. For a moment, just before Harold vanishes, a second shadow appears in the doorway, taller, sharper. standing just behind him. The case file closes without answers. The motel eventually shutters, and the tapes are boxed and forgotten. Years later, a traveler passing by stops to take photos of the abandoned building. When he looks at one of the shots, taken through the broken window of room 9, he notices something strange. On the wall above the bed, faint but visible, are damp footprints leading from the door to the bathroom, one step at a time. The last print half faded into the floor tiles, as if whoever made it was still halfway through leaving. The forest was quiet that morning, too quiet. A pale fog clung to the trees, swallowing sound, softening the edges of everything. The only noise was the distant hum of a car engine breaking through the mist. Inside, a couple in their mid-30s, Emma and Brian, were driving along an empty back road in rural Montana. They had been arguing minutes earlier, their words sharp and tired, but now both had fallen silent. Emma was staring out the window, watching the endless blur of pines when she saw something move. At first, she thought it was an animal. Then, as the fog shifted, she realized it was a person, a girl, stepping out from between the trees. Barefoot, shaking, her skin pale as the mist itself. Brian slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, gravel crunching under the tires. For a second, neither of them moved. The girl stood in the middle of the road, wearing a tattered flannel shirt 2 sizes too big and jeans torn at the knees. Her hair was matted, her eyes glassy, unfocused. She looked about 16. When Emma got out of the car and called to her, the girl didn't respond. She just stared past them, toward the forest, lips trembling as if trying to form words. At the local sheriff's station, things got stranger. Her name was identified as Abigail Lowe, a girl reported missing 3 years ago from a town nearly 80 miles away. The police had presumed her dead. Now she sat in a thin hospital gown under fluorescent lights, silent except for the occasional hum she made under her breath, like she was trying to remember a song. When the doctor asked her where she had been, she whispered something that made everyone pause. "He wouldn't let us leave." Her statement came in fragments over the next few days, pieced together through long pauses and shaking hands. She said she woke up underground. The walls were concrete. The air smelled of earth and iron. Sometimes she could hear dripping water. Sometimes she could hear crying. There were others. She could hear them through the walls. A man would come down once a day, humming softly, always the same tune, always calm. She never saw his face, only his hands, pale, veined, trembling. The sheriff organized a search party to investigate the area where she was found. They discovered remnants of what might have been an old storm shelter deep in the woods, a steel door half buried under moss and soil. When they pried it open, the stench was unbearable. Inside, the walls were lined with claw marks. There were no bodies, but something had definitely lived there, or been kept there. The rescuers reported a sense of dread, a heaviness in the air that made them feel sick. One of them, a veteran officer, said he'd rather go back to war than down that hole again. As Abigail's memories returned, they became more fragmented, more disturbing. She began to draw crude sketches in charcoal of twisted trees and faceless figures. Each one seemed to depict a different place in the woods, but there was always one recurring image: a large, hollow tree with something dark inside it. When the police brought her a map, she pointed to a stretch of unmarked land and said, "There, that's where they're still down there." Forensics teams combed the location she identified. They found traces of rope, decayed fabric, and a shallow pit lined with broken stones, but no bodies. The area was sealed off, and the official report concluded there was insufficient evidence to confirm her claims. Still, the story spread like wildfire through local media. The girl who walked out of the woods. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered that she hadn't escaped at all, that whatever had taken her had only let her go because it wanted to be found. Back in the hospital, Abigail refused to sleep. The nurses would find her sitting upright in bed, staring at the corner of the room, whispering quietly to herself. When asked what she was saying, she replied, "He's looking for me." One night, the nurse on duty swore she saw something strange, a shadow stretching along the wall, tall and thin, but with no source. The lights flickered. When they came back, Abigail was gone. The next morning, The bed was empty. The window was open, rain blowing through. On the pillow lay the same torn piece of flannel she'd been found wearing, and beneath it, a scrap of paper with smudged charcoal lines. A map of the forest, drawn shakily by hand. In the center, circled over and over again until the paper nearly tore, was that same hollow tree. Next to it, a single sentence written in uneven handwriting. "They're still down there." It was one of those nights when the city seemed to hum with a restless pulse. Rain slid down the windshield in silver ribbons, distorting the world beyond the glass into a dreamlike blur. Samir Patel adjusted his phone on the dashboard, starting another late-night shift as a rideshare driver in downtown Chicago. He'd been driving for hours, ferrying strangers across the city, faces that came and went like ghosts. The night air carried that hollow quiet between storms, the kind that made everything feel a little unreal. At 2:51 a.m., a new request came through, pickup from Halstead and 19th, destination listed only as home. The passenger's profile had no photo, no rating. Samir hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen, then accepted. Bills were bills. The GPS guided him through slick streets lined with flickering streetlights. He reached the curb where a single figure waited under a broken umbrella. A tall man in a gray coat, head bowed, face obscured. The man opened the back door slowly, sliding in without a word. The air grew noticeably colder. "Good evening," Samir said, forcing politeness. The man didn't respond. His reflection flickered faintly in the rearview mirror. Pale skin, dark eyes, a faint smile that didn't move with his face. Samir told himself he was imagining things. He adjusted the mirror slightly, cleared his throat, and started driving. The dashcam recorded everything. The wet streets, the rhythmic wipers, and the quiet breathing from the back seat. The passenger stared out the window the entire time, saying nothing. Samir checked the GPS again. The destination marker was strange. It hovered in the middle of an overpass on the outskirts of town, where there were no houses, no lights, no exits. "Hey, I think there's a mistake," Samir said, glancing into the mirror. "You sure this is where you're headed?" The man leaned forward slightly, voice low but calm. "Just keep driving." The car continued through the rain. The sound of tires on wet asphalt filled the silence. The overpass appeared ahead, a long stretch of concrete hovering over a railway line. The streetlights dead, the world beneath swallowed in shadow. Samir's hands tightened around the wheel. He glanced into the mirror again. The passenger's reflection was still there, but when he looked back at the seat itself, it was empty. Panic surged through his chest. He slammed the brakes. The car skidded, stopped in the middle of the overpass. The door locks clicked shut on their own. "Hello," he called out, twisting around. The back seat was empty, completely dry, no footprints, no damp marks, nothing. His breath came fast. He unlocked the doors, stepped out into the rain, and looked around. The wind howled across the bridge, carrying the distant wail of a train somewhere below. The city lights were miles away now, reduced to faint glows behind sheets of fog. He stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, before climbing back into the car. The passenger's destination was still blinking on his phone. Same coordinates, same word, home. He ended the ride manually and began to drive back toward the city. But after a few minutes, he noticed something strange. The streets didn't look familiar anymore. Every turn led him to another overpass. Every sign seemed to point the wrong way. The GPS kept rerouting, the same voice repeating, "Continue for 1 mile, then turn left," even though he hadn't passed any intersections. The footage later showed the clock on his dash flashing erratically. 2:58, then 3:03, then 3:07 a.m. Before freezing, the camera captured his face illuminated by passing lights, his eyes darting between mirrors, searching for something. Then, just for a second, the reflection of the back seat appeared again. The passenger was sitting there, perfectly still, smiling faintly. But his eyes weren't looking out the window anymore. They were staring directly into the lens. The car veered slightly. Samir's breathing quickened. "Who are you?" he whispered. No answer. He turned around again. The seat was empty once more. The camera flickered, then cut out completely. The next morning, police found his car abandoned under the same overpass. The engine was still running. The doors unlocked. Inside, everything was dry except for the back seat, which was soaked as if someone had just climbed out of the rain. His phone was mounted on the dashboard, frozen on 3:07 a.m. His wife, Amina, spent weeks rewatching the footage that had been automatically uploaded to the cloud. Late one night, she claimed she heard something new in the final seconds before the camera died, faint breathing, followed by a whisper that seemed to come from right behind her husband. "You made it home." She turned the volume up, tears in her eyes, replaying it again and again. The whisper didn't change. The only thing that did, the last time she listened, was the reflection in the car window. For the briefest moment, she swore she saw a second face, just over Samir's shoulder, smiling into the darkness. The sea was restless that winter, a living thing that clawed at the cliffs with relentless hunger. The wind howled across the jagged rocks, carrying salt and cold like invisible knives. Miles from the nearest town, perched on the edge of the world, stood the Wrenhaven Lighthouse, a skeletal tower of rusted iron and fading paint. For over a century, it had guided ships through the storms off the coast of Maine. But in the winter of 1976, it became a tomb of unanswered questions. 3 men were stationed there that season: Arthur Bell, the keeper, a stoic man in his 50s with weathered hands and quiet eyes; Thomas Reed, his young apprentice barely 23, eager but naive; and Graham Holt, the mechanic, a former sailor who'd seen too much and spoke too little. Their job was simple: maintain the light, log the weather, and keep each other sane through the long months of isolation. But sanity is fragile when all you can hear is the ocean breathing in your sleep. The first month passed without incident. Their logbook was meticulous: wind speeds, barometric pressure, maintenance reports. Then, in mid-January, the entries changed. The handwriting grew erratic, the language strange. "The fog's been heavier lately," Arthur wrote. "Can't see 20 feet out. Sometimes I swear I hear voices in it." Thomas added, "Something's out there calling our names." Thought it was the radio at first. It isn't. The storm that week was one of the worst on record. Waves the size of houses battered the cliffside. The lantern glass cracked from the pressure of the wind. In the logbook, one entry from Graham stood out. "Arthur's been standing at the light all night. Says he saw someone waving from the water. No ship, just a hand." 2 days later, the handwriting changed again, now shaky, hurried. "Arthur's gone." It read. "Door open. No footprints leading away. Light keeps turning itself on." The following pages were smeared, water-damaged, as if someone had tried to write while crying or shaking. When the rescue ship Mariner's Grace finally reached the lighthouse 3 weeks later, the storm had passed. The keepers were gone. The door was bolted from the inside. Dishes sat half-washed in the sink. 3 chairs at the kitchen table. 3 cups of tea, cold and untouched. In the corner, the logbook lay open to the last entry, scrawled across the page in uneven, desperate strokes. "The light is calling him now." The rescue crew searched the entire tower. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints. Only one strange detail: the light at the top was still burning, even though the fuel tank was empty. When they played back the emergency radio logs from the week before, there was one recording they couldn't explain: a faint transmission received from the Wrenhaven frequency. At first, it sounded like wind. Then, like the low murmur of men speaking underwater. The final few seconds captured something else entirely: a single, drawn-out word, distorted by static: "Stay." The official report listed the incident as unresolved. Supplies were retrieved, the tower sealed, and Wrenhaven was decommissioned. But fishermen who passed the cliffs on foggy nights claimed the light still came on, even after the power was cut. They said it rotated slowly, searching the horizon, and sometimes, if you listened closely, you could hear the faint toll of a bell coming from somewhere deep beneath the waves. Years later, when a historian reopened the lighthouse archives, he found the original logbook preserved in storage. The ink had faded, the paper stiff with age, but under the last entry, barely visible unless held under light, Someone had pressed a message into the paper without ink, just deep indentations from a trembling hand. It read, "We didn't turn the light on." The campus of Hollow Creek University looked ordinary by day, ivy crawling up red brick walls, the steady hum of student chatter, the faint echo of footsteps through marble corridors. But at night, it changed. The shadows lengthened, the lights buzzed faintly, and the air carried a strange emptiness, as if the whole place held its breath. It was on one of those nights that Leah Morgan vanished. Leah was a senior majoring in psychology, the kind of student who always stayed late in the library, headphones in, lost in her notes. She was ambitious but quiet, known for her meticulous study habits and her love of being alone. Her roommate said she was the type who disappeared into her own head sometimes. On November 12th, she texted a friend at 11:08 p.m. saying she'd be leaving the library soon. She never made it home. The next morning, her backpack was found still resting under her usual study table, laptop closed, coffee cup half full, and her notebook open to a page that read, "Sometimes I feel like I'm not really here." The security footage was supposed to solve everything, but instead it made the story unravel. The video showed Leah entering the library at 9:46 p.m., swiping her ID card, walking past the front desk, and heading toward the third floor. The footage after that is blurry, but it's clear she spent hours reading, occasionally glancing toward the windows. Around 11:06, something strange happens. The motion detection system triggers in the west corridor, the same area leading to the stairwell, even though no one appears on camera. Leah looks up suddenly, staring off-screen, as if hearing something. Then, she stands, gathers her things, and walks out of frame. The next angle should have shown her leaving through the main doors. But it doesn't. The timestamp jumps forward 3 seconds, and she's gone. Campus police dismissed it as a camera glitch, but students started whispering. Some claim to have seen her that night, walking outside, barefoot, hair loose, mumbling something they couldn't make out. One said she passed him on the quad, looking straight ahead, eyes wide open, but unfocused, like she wasn't really seeing. Over the next week, more reports surfaced. Books missing from shelves, the elevator stopping on the third floor without being called, and at 2 a.m. Every night, the motion sensors in the west corridor would activate, always for exactly 7 seconds, before shutting off. Detective Alan Keene was brought in from the city to review the footage again. He slowed the frames down, watching Leah's last moments carefully. That's when he noticed something subtle, a reflection in the glass near her study table. It showed her sitting there, but behind her, faintly, there was another Leah. Same clothes, same posture, but a second later in movement, like a delayed echo. When he reversed the clip, the reflection didn't reverse. It kept moving forward, independent of her. The investigation deepened. The school administrators grew nervous, locking the library after midnight, increasing patrols. But it didn't stop the rumors. One janitor swore that while cleaning the third floor, he found fresh handwriting on a whiteboard Leah used. Her name, written 3 times, as if she'd been trying to remind herself she existed. On the 7th night, a security guard named Ramos saw something on the monitor that froze him in place. Leah appeared again, walking past the main camera. Not an old recording live feed. The timestamp was that night. She moved slowly down the corridor, her expression blank, her reflection still a second behind her. Ramos ran to the hallway, calling her name. The corridor was empty. Only the faint scent of old books and dust lingered in the air. The following morning, campus security reviewed the tape again. The footage from the west corridor glitched, distorted lines, a flicker of static, but right before it cut out, Leah turned her head toward the camera and smiled faintly, her eyes hollow. The timestamp read, yesterday. Hollow Creek University never released the video publicly. The official statement said the case remained open, pending further evidence. The library reopened a month later with upgraded cameras and new lighting. But every year, around November, students say they hear soft footsteps on the third floor long after closing. And if you sit at Leah's old table, the light above flickers once, then stays dim. Some say that if you look into the window at the right angle, you'll see her reflection staring back. Not behind you, not beside you, but right where you're sitting, as if she never left. The town of Ravenshade was the kind of place people passed through without stopping, a lonely stretch of asphalt winding through pine forests and fog-choked hills. Only a few hundred people called it home, most of them quiet, secretive, the sort who looked away when you tried to make small talk. But in October of 1998, something happened that the town could never look away from again. That was the year the Holloway family disappeared. They weren't strangers. Everyone knew James and Marla Holloway, a middle-aged couple with 2 kids, Sophie, 9, and Eli, 12. They lived at the edge of town in a creaking 2-story farmhouse surrounded by acres of misty fields and tall, skeletal trees. James ran the local hardware store. Marla baked pies for the church fundraisers. They were, by all accounts, ordinary, happy, polite, the kind of family whose porch light was always on. On October 11th, the Holloways invited their neighbors over for dinner. Nothing special, just stew and conversation. They laughed, drank wine, and said their goodbyes around 9:30 p.m. The next morning, their neighbor, Ruth Dillon, noticed something strange. The Holloways' front door stood half open, swaying in the wind. She called out. No answer. When she stepped inside, the house felt wrong, too quiet, too cold. The radio hummed static. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, but the food was untouched. Upstairs, the beds were unmade, the windows open, and Sophie's favorite stuffed rabbit lay in the hallway, one ear torn off. Ruth ran to the police station. Within hours, the property was crawling with officers and search dogs. But there were no footprints, no signs of struggle, no blood. It was as if the family had simply evaporated. The sheriff at the time, Calvin Price, was an old man who'd seen his share of tragedy. But nothing like this. It was like walking into a photograph, he said later. Everything still, everything frozen. But no one left in the picture. The investigation expanded. They combed the woods, drained the pond, even searched the old coal tunnels beneath the fields. Nothing. Then, on the 5th day, they found something that changed everything. Deep in the woods, several miles from the Holloway home, stood an old root cellar, one that hadn't been used in decades. Its door was chained shut from the outside. Inside were drawings pinned to the wall, dozens of them, made with charcoal and smeared paint. Children's drawings. Each one showed a tall, faceless figure standing in a field, arms outstretched, surrounded by smaller shapes. In the corner of one sketch, a faint note was written, "We follow the sound." DNA confirmed that some of the hair and fingerprints belonged to Sophie and Eli, but there was no trace of where the drawings came from or who had been there. The cellar was sealed again after that. A month later, strange reports began spreading. Farmers said they heard laughter echoing through the fields late at night, children's laughter, drifting through the fog. One man claimed he saw a small figure standing in the road at dawn, barefoot, with long hair and hollow eyes, holding something that looked like a rabbit. When he blinked, she was gone. By December, most of the town had gone silent. The Holloway home sat abandoned, its paint peeling, windows boarded, a for sale sign leaning crookedly in the yard. Then, one night, a trucker passing through Ravenshade called 911. He'd seen something strange from the road lights in the fields, moving slowly in a circle, as if lanterns were being carried by invisible hands. The dispatcher told him there were no houses there anymore. The land had been empty for years. When officers arrived, they found nothing but trampled grass and faint footprints, small ones, like those of a child. In the dirt near the edge of the field, someone had written a single word with their finger, "Listen." In the years since, people still report odd happenings near the Holloway property. Phones die when you drive past. Dogs refuse to go near the fence. And on certain foggy nights, if you stop your car and roll down the window, you might hear a faint sound beneath the wind, a whisper, almost a hum, like someone singing softly in the dark. Locals say it's the Holloway children, still trying to find their way home. Others say it's something else entirely, the thing from their drawings, the one they called the sound. Whatever it is, no one stays long enough to find out. The farmhouse still stands, its porch light burned out decades ago, but the stories keep it glowing in memory, a reminder that sometimes, entire families don't vanish into nothing. Sometimes, they follow something that's been calling them all along. The train station was empty that night, as it always was after the last run. The platforms were silent, the tracks gleaming under the harsh lights, stretching out like forgotten roads leading into the darkness. The old clock above the ticket booth ticked loudly in the stillness, its second hand scraping the moments away. Everything about it felt wrong, as if the whole place were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Anna Gray had worked the late shift at the station for 3 years. She knew the rhythm of the nights, the occasional late passenger, the hum of the vending machines, the low murmur of the air conditioning. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was something in the air, a heaviness that made her skin prickle. She couldn't explain it, but the station felt watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the loose chain on the door sent her heart racing. At 11:42 p.m., the usual final train pulled into the station. Anna glanced up from the ticket counter. There were only 2 passengers. A man sitting at the far end of the bench, wearing a long, black coat, his hat pulled low, and a woman standing near the platform edge, staring blankly into the distance. Anna didn't recognize either of them, but that didn't bother her. It was a small town, the kind where people passed through without a trace. She finished her paperwork, her eyes flicking up occasionally to check on the passengers. That's when she noticed something strange. The man in the coat hadn't moved. Not once. No shift of his legs. No change in posture. He hadn't even taken off his hat. Anna glanced at the clock again. 11:47 p.m. He had been sitting there for over 10 minutes, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the tracks. The woman at the platform edge suddenly spoke. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "It's coming." Anna froze. She didn't know why, but the words sent a chill through her. She leaned forward, trying to make sense of the situation. The woman's eyes were unfocused, as if she wasn't truly seeing the station at all. She stood as still as the man, only her lips moving, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's coming. It's coming. It's coming." Anna stood, heart pounding, and stepped out from behind the counter. She moved cautiously toward the woman, trying to get her attention. "Excuse me, miss, is everything okay?" The woman didn't react. Her hands hung limply at her sides, her head tilted slightly, as if she were listening to something just out of reach. The man in the black coat remained motionless. Suddenly, the sound of the train's engine sputtered to life. Anna turned, her stomach sinking. The train should have already left. The platform was empty now, no one on the train, no one on the benches. Just the man, still frozen, and the woman standing at the edge of the platform, staring down the tracks. The lights flickered overhead, and the temperature dropped. The sound of the train grew louder, almost deafening. The whistle howled, and a cold gust of wind rushed through the station. Anna stumbled back, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She felt the pull, an invisible force urging her toward the platform. It was as if the station had become a mouth, opening wide to swallow everything in its path. She turned to run back to the counter, but as she did, her foot caught on something. She looked down, and her breath caught in her throat. The tracks, which should have been empty, were now covered in a thin layer of fog. The fog was swirling, moving in unnatural patterns, like something alive. And then she saw it, a figure emerging from the mist. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its limbs stretched too far, too long. The edges of its body blurred, indistinct, as if it were being swallowed by the darkness. Anna's heart hammered in her chest. The figure stepped onto the platform, its head tilting at an odd angle, as if it were looking for something. For her, her feet wouldn't move. She wanted to scream, but her throat was tight, her voice strangled by fear. The figure continued toward her, its steps slow but deliberate, the air around it crackling with static. Then the woman spoke again. "It's here." The train's whistle blared again, but the sound was distant now, muffled, as if coming from underwater. The figure reached the platform, its head swiveling in a jerking motion. Anna's vision blurred. She reached for her radio, her hand trembling, but before she could speak into it, the figure was there, standing right in front of her, its empty eyes locking with hers. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Anna's breath caught in her throat as the figure leaned down, its face coming close. The smell of decay filled the air, sharp and nauseating. She wanted to pull away, but she couldn't. The figure whispered something. "You're next." The lights flickered again. The station was silent. The train had stopped. The man in the black coat was gone. The woman was gone. And Anna was alone, standing in the empty station with the echo of those words ringing in her ears. When the police arrived the next morning, they found the station as it always was, empty, quiet, with nothing but the sound of the wind howling through the station's broken windows. But the ticket counter was gone, vanished, and in the corner, where Anna had been standing, they found only one thing. A single train ticket, crumpled and wet, with the words "Next stop, nowhere." The fog rolled in thick that night, swallowing the town of Briar Creek whole. Streets disappeared under a blanket of mist, the lights from the few street lamps barely cutting through the gloom. The moon, full and heavy, sat high in the sky but offered little comfort. The quiet was unnatural, as if the town itself had been frozen in time. It wasn't the first time Briar Creek had been like this, and most of the locals had learned to ignore the feeling of unease that crept into their bones when the fog settled in. At Tanner's bar, the usual crowd of tired, weathered faces sat quietly, nursing drinks and watching the haze outside. It was a Thursday night, but the bar was emptier than usual. No one seemed in the mood for conversation. Even the bartender, Jackie, moved slowly, almost mechanically, her eyes distant, lost in thought. And then, the door opened. The bell above it jingled softly, barely cutting through the murmur of the few patrons inside. The man who entered was tall, thin, his face pale as bone, and his eyes empty. There was something wrong about him, something unnatural that made every head in the bar turn. He was dressed in dark clothes, his coat a heavy, old-fashioned cut that didn't quite fit with the modern world outside. His shoes clicked sharply against the floor as he made his way to the bar, his movements deliberate, methodical. He took a seat at the counter without asking, his hands folding neatly in front of him as if he had done this many times before. For a moment, there was only the sound of the man's breathing and the quiet shuffle of Jackie's feet behind the bar. "What can I get you?" Jackie asked, her voice low, like she was trying to hide something. The man didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, his eyes unblinking. The air in the bar seemed to grow colder, the fog outside pressing closer against the walls. Finally, he spoke, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "A drink," he said, "and I'll be here a while." Jackie's hands froze for a moment as she reached for a bottle, her eyes flicking nervously to the others in the room. It was only when she looked back at him that she realized something was terribly wrong. His reflection wasn't in the bar mirror. For the first time in years, Jackie's breath caught in her throat. She reached for the whiskey bottle again, but her hand shook. The man noticed, his lips curling slightly into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The fog is thick tonight," he said casually, as if he was speaking about the weather, about something inconsequential. "It's been a long time since I've been here. I've missed it." His words lingered in the air, heavy, suffocating. The low hum of the bar seemed to grow louder, but no one spoke. No one moved. They were watching him, though, all of them, trying to pretend they hadn't noticed the strange unease that had settled over the room. Jackie served him the drink, sliding the glass across the counter, her hands still trembling. As she did, she caught a glimpse of his eyes again, black as night, endless, unfathomable. It felt as though the man's gaze was cutting through her soul. He drank slowly, savoring the taste, never taking his eyes off her. Finally, Jackie couldn't stand it anymore. "What do you want?" she blurted out, her voice unsteady. The man looked at her, his lips twitching in a smile that sent a chill down her spine. "I'm here to finish something," he said, his voice still calm, almost kind, as if they were old friends. "You don't remember me, do you?" Jackie shook her head, her thoughts scrambling for some kind of recognition. But there was nothing. She had never seen this man before in her life. He chuckled softly, the sound almost gentle. "No, of course not. It's been a long time. The fog has a way of erasing things. doesn't it? He leaned forward, his voice dropping. It has a way of hiding things. Of hiding people. Jackie's pulse quickened. She looked at the other patrons, but they were all staring at their drinks, as though they were pretending he wasn't there. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Who are you?" she asked, the words tumbling out despite herself. The man leaned back in his chair, a deep, satisfied sigh escaping his lips. "That's the thing about fog, Jackie," he said. "It makes it so much easier to forget. You can forget people, places, even yourself." He paused, his smile deepening. "But sometimes, things come back, things that were never really gone." Jackie's stomach dropped. Something about his words, his tone, it was like he wasn't speaking to her at all, but to something far older, far darker. Something she couldn't quite grasp. The fog outside pressed against the windows, thickening. The shadows in the bar seemed to stretch longer, closer. Jackie opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, the man stood. His drink remained untouched on the counter. He smiled at her one last time, the same cold, hollow smile. "You'll remember me soon enough," he said softly, "when the fog lifts." And with that, he turned and walked toward the door. Jackie watched as he passed the others, but none of them moved. None of them reacted. The man reached the door and paused for a moment, glancing over his shoulder. "Tell the others," he said, his voice almost playful, "that the fog's coming for them too." With that, he stepped out into the night, the door swinging shut behind him. The bell above it jingled softly, like a whisper in the silence. Jackie stood there for a long time, staring at the door. The room was still, the fog outside thicker than before. The patrons didn't move. No one spoke. They just sat there, staring into the emptiness. Finally, Jackie forced herself to turn back to the counter. But the drink the man had ordered was gone, as if it had never been there at all. And somewhere in the mist, in the space between what was and what could have been, the man was waiting, waiting for the fog to swallow Briar Creek whole. The clock in the town hall tower struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty streets like distant, forgotten memories. The wind howled between the buildings, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something far colder. The small town of Greystone was like any other rural town. Quiet, almost too quiet, with its half-dilapidated houses and overgrown lawns. The townsfolk had learned to live with the silence, to ignore the lingering sense that something was always just beyond their reach. It was the kind of place that would never make the news, a place people passed through without a second thought. But things had changed in Greystone, and no one knew why. It started with the disappearances, one by one, the kind of disappearances that left no trace. At first, it was only a few people, strangers, drifters, the ones who came and went without anyone noticing. Then, it was the locals. One night, a young couple who lived in the old farmhouse at the edge of town simply vanished. Their car was found abandoned by the side of the road, the door wide open, and their dog found wandering aimlessly through the woods. But there was no sign of them. The police couldn't explain it, and neither could anyone else. As the months went on, the disappearances became more frequent. The town's few remaining residents spoke in hushed tones about what was happening. The sheriff, Nate Walker, a man who had seen more than his fair share of tragedy, was at a loss. He called in a specialist, Dr. Lena Hargrave, a seasoned investigator in strange occurrences, hoping she could make sense of the situation. She arrived in the early morning, just as the sun was rising, its pale light cutting through the fog that hung over Greystone like a veil. Dr. Hargrave was not a woman who believed in coincidence. She didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but she had learned over the years that some things couldn't be explained with science alone. When she arrived at the sheriff's office, she was greeted with a mix of skepticism and fear. The townspeople had stopped coming to town hall altogether. They preferred to stay indoors, locking their doors and keeping to themselves, too afraid to speak of the thing that had begun haunting them. "I'll need to see the last few missing persons reports," Dr. Hargrave said, sitting down at the desk and flipping through the pile of documents in front of her. Sheriff Walker didn't say anything. He just slid the stack of papers toward her, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had seen this kind of fear before, but never in a town like Greystone. Dr. Hargrave scanned the reports quickly. There was nothing unusual about them at first glance, just the same things she had seen in dozens of other cases. People gone missing without a trace, often from their homes or during their nightly routines. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle, just a void where they had been. But then she reached the most recent report. David and Sarah Montgomery, both in their mid-30s, reported missing after an evening walk through the woods. The report noted that their dog had been found near the entrance to the woods, but there was no sign of the couple. The last entry in the report was peculiar. A brief mention of strange markings found near the woods, large symbols etched into the earth, but no one could identify what they meant. "What are these symbols?" Dr. Hargrave asked, pointing to the note. Sheriff Walker leaned in, his brow furrowing. "That's what we don't know. No one around here has seen anything like it before. The deputy who found them said they looked unnatural, almost like they were carved into the ground. It's the only clue we've got." "Show me," Dr. Hargrave said, standing up abruptly. The sheriff led her out of his office and to his truck, and they drove in silence through the winding streets of Greystone, past the crumbling buildings and the abandoned houses that seemed to sag under their own weight. They passed the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, the iron gates barely hanging on their rusted hinges, and finally arrived at the edge of the woods. The air was thick with mist, and the trees loomed above them like silent sentinels, their branches stretching out like hands that reached for the sky. They parked near the entrance to the woods, and Sheriff Walker led Dr. Hargrave down a narrow trail, the earth soft beneath their feet. As they walked, the trees grew thicker, blocking out what little light filtered through the fog. The silence was deafening. Not a bird, not a rustle in the leaves, just the sound of their footsteps crunching on the damp ground. Finally, they arrived at a clearing. In the center, the earth had been disturbed, large grooves and deep cuts marking the ground. Symbols, strange, jagged shapes, had been carved into the soil, as though something had dragged a blade across the earth, over and over again. Some of the markings resembled ancient runes, but others were more abstract, as if they were trying to communicate something otherworldly. Dr. Hargrave knelt down, running her fingers over the markings. "This isn't just random," she murmured. "These symbols mean something. They're part of a ritual or a warning." Sheriff Walker shuddered, his breath visible in the cold air. "That's what we were afraid of. Some of the older townsfolk talk about things that happened a long time ago, before the town was founded. Strange things, things that were buried in the past." "What kind of things?" Dr. Hargrave asked, looking up from the markings. "There's a legend," the sheriff said quietly. "A story passed down from generation to generation, about something that lives beneath Greystone, something ancient, something that waits for the fog to return. Some say it's a curse, others say it's a punishment for something our ancestors did. But whatever it is, it only comes when the fog rolls in. And when it does, people vanish. No one ever comes back." Dr. Hargrave stood, her mind racing. "This doesn't make sense. People don't just disappear because of a curse. There has to be a rational explanation." Sheriff Walker's face darkened. "I wish I could believe that, but the people who've gone missing didn't leave anything behind. No footprints, no signs of struggle. It's like they were erased from existence. And the fog," he paused, his voice growing thick. "The fog's been getting thicker, more frequent. It doesn't feel natural, like it's alive." Dr. Hargrave stared at him for a long moment, trying to make sense of the situation. The markings, the disappearances, the fear in the sheriff's eyes. It all pointed to something far more disturbing than a simple criminal act. "There's one more thing you need to see," Sheriff Walker said suddenly. He led her to a small clearing a little further into the woods. There, in the center of the clearing, was an old, decaying tree. Its bark was twisted, gnarled, like something had been scratching at it for years. At the base of the tree, partially buried in the soil, was something else. A stone, flat and smooth, but with markings carved into its surface. "Is this another symbol?" Dr. Hargrave asked, kneeling down to inspect it. The sheriff nodded. "That stone's been here for as long as anyone can remember. They say it marks the place where the thing sleeps. Whatever it is, it's tied to that stone. Dr. Hargrave ran her fingers over the surface of the stone. The carvings were familiar, but they didn't match anything she had seen before. The patterns were like a maze, twisting and turning, leading nowhere and everywhere all at once. The deeper she touched the stone, the colder it felt, as if it were sucking the warmth from her fingers. And then, for the briefest moment, the fog around them thickened, swirling like a living thing, and she heard something, a low, guttural whisper, barely audible above the wind. It was coming from the stone. She stood quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sheriff Walker's eyes widened, and for the first time, Dr. Hargrave saw real fear in them. "It's starting," he whispered. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the fog around them thickened, swirling in unnatural patterns. The trees creaked and groaned as if something were moving beneath their roots. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a chorus of voices, all saying the same thing. "Come closer, come closer, come closer." The earth cracked open beneath them, and Dr. Hargrave stumbled backward. The stone began to glow, its carvings pulsating with a sickly green light. She could feel it now, the presence that had been waiting for so long. It was here, and in the distance, just beyond the trees, she saw it. A figure tall and twisted, its form barely visible in the mist, but its eyes burned with an unnatural fire, and they were fixed directly on her. With a gasp, she turned to run, but before she could take a step, the fog rushed forward, swallowing her whole. The town of Mapleton had always been quiet, nestled in the valley between two hills where the wind swept through the pine trees, and the world felt like it had forgotten how to make noise. Its inhabitants were simple folk, working hard and raising families in homes that had been passed down for generations. But there was always an underlying sense of something hidden beneath the town's peaceful exterior. Something that whispered in the corners of conversation. Something that no one would speak of, but everyone felt. It was in the year 1974 that the town's fate began to change, and it started with the arrival of Eleanor Beck. Eleanor was a journalist, a writer, and an outsider, sent to Mapleton to report on a local story about the disappearance of several hikers in the nearby Brandon Forest. She wasn't from the town, nor did she have any interest in the small, picturesque community. She had come because it was a case that had intrigued her, a mystery that seemed like it could be solved with just the right amount of digging. But the deeper she dug, the more she uncovered, and she found herself walking down a path that would lead her into the heart of something ancient, something terrifying, something that would change the course of her life forever. It all began one evening in the fall, when Eleanor sat in the small-town diner, nursing a cup of coffee as she read through old news clippings about the missing hikers. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink smudged, but she could still make out the details. The hikers had been young, eager for adventure, and had entered Brandon Forest just as any normal group of explorers would have. They were never seen again. A search party had gone in, but after days of searching, they found no trace of the hikers. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not even a sign of struggle. It was as if they had simply disappeared into thin air. The case had gone cold, and the forest had been left alone for years. But Eleanor's curiosity was piqued. There had to be something more to it. She wasn't just going to take the town's word that this was some random, unexplainable tragedy. Her instincts told her that the story ran deeper, and she wasn't wrong. That night, as Eleanor sat at the diner, she noticed a man at the counter, his face shadowed under a hat, his jacket worn and frayed. He didn't speak, just sat there, staring at his coffee. She tried to ignore him at first, but there was something about him, something in the way he looked at her, that made her uneasy. She didn't know what it was, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, or someone. Finally, after a long silence, the man spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, but there was a sense of urgency in his words. "You're looking into the disappearances, aren't you?" Eleanor was taken aback. She hadn't told anyone about her investigation. How could he possibly know? She nodded cautiously, trying to keep her composure. Yes, I am. I've been reading about the hikers. It doesn't make sense. No signs of them anywhere. It's as if they just vanished. The man leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing as he glanced around the diner. The air seemed to grow colder, though it wasn't as if the temperature had dropped. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice trembling slightly. The forest is cursed. It's not just the hikers. There have been others. Over the years, people who've vanished, and it's always the same. They're never found. They take them. Eleanor's heart began to race. The man's words sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to remain calm. Who's they? She asked, though she was already dreading the answer. The man glanced down at his coffee, his hand shaking slightly as he gripped the cup. He didn't look up when he spoke again. The forest. It has a mind of its own, and it doesn't like to be disturbed. Once you go in, once you cross the boundaries, there's no turning back. You'll be like the others. You'll disappear. Eleanor didn't know whether to laugh or take him seriously. She had heard stories like this before, old superstitions and folklore, the kind of tales people tell when they don't understand the world around them. But something about the man's eyes, the fear in them, made her hesitate. I think you're just scared, she said, trying to sound reassuring. There's no such thing as a cursed forest. These people went missing because of something we don't understand. That's all. I'll figure it out. The man's eyes flicked to hers, locking onto her gaze. His voice was barely above a whisper as he leaned closer. Don't go into the forest, miss. Don't go near the Brandon forest. There's something in there, something that has been waiting for centuries. It's alive. It's watching. Eleanor was about to say something, but the man stood up abruptly and walked out of the diner, leaving his coffee untouched. She sat there for a long time, the unease spreading through her chest, her thoughts swirling with confusion and skepticism. Over the next few days, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the man's warning. She couldn't explain why, but something in his eyes haunted her. She tried to focus on the missing hikers, on finding clues, but every step she took felt like she was being led in a direction she didn't want to go, toward the forest. On the morning of October 25th, she finally gave in. Eleanor packed her things and drove to the edge of Brandon Forest, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the trailhead. The fog that hung in the air seemed to cling to the trees, thick and oppressive, like something that had never been disturbed. It was the sort of place that felt ancient, alive with secrets, and Eleanor felt as though it was waiting for her. She had been warned, but her instincts, her need to uncover the truth, urged her forward. She stepped into the forest, the path narrow and winding, the trees looming over her like silent sentinels. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became. It was as if the forest was closing in around her, the trees pressing against each other, blocking out the light. The silence was suffocating. As she ventured further, Eleanor began to feel disoriented. The path she had been following seemed to twist and change, as though it were deliberately trying to confuse her. And the deeper she went, the more the sense of unease grew. The whispers she had heard in the diner, the warnings from the man, began to echo in her mind. She tried to shake them off, but they lingered, curling around her thoughts like tendrils. The forest was alive. It was watching her. Suddenly, she heard a sound, a rustling in the trees, faint but distinct. Eleanor stopped, her breath caught in her throat. She glanced around, but saw nothing. No movement, no creatures, just the heavy stillness of the forest. But the sound persisted, growing louder, closer. Then she saw it, a shadow, darting between the trees, moving too quickly for her to track. Her heart skipped a beat. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she couldn't move. She was frozen, rooted to the spot. And then the voice came. It was faint, but unmistakable, like a soft whisper carried by the wind. You shouldn't have come. Eleanor spun around, but no one was there. Her pulse raced, her hands trembling. She took a step back, but then froze again. The forest had changed. The trees seemed taller, darker, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. The air was thick with an almost tangible pressure. Something was here. She wasn't alone. The whispers returned, louder now, and they were no longer just in her mind. They came from all around her, coming from the trees, the ground beneath her feet, the very air she breathed. They spoke in voices she couldn't understand, words twisted and ancient, as if they were speaking a language that had been lost to time. Eleanor backed away, her breath shallow, her mind spinning. She turned to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Her body felt heavy, as though the forest itself was holding her in place. The shadows around her shifted. A shape appeared at the edge of the trees, tall, thin, its limbs stretching too far, too unnaturally. It moved slowly, purposefully toward her, its face obscured by a mask of darkness. Eleanor screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest, absorbed into the shadows. And then, the ground beneath her feet gave way. The next morning, a search party was organized to find Eleanor. They scoured the forest, following the trail she had left behind, but found nothing. Not a trace, no sign of her disappearance. As the search grew colder, the townsfolk whispered among themselves. The forest had claimed her, just as it had claimed others before her. Some said she had uncovered the town's secret, and the forest didn't take kindly to intruders. Others said that it had been waiting for her, that she had walked right into its embrace. But no one in Mapleton would ever speak of it again. The forest had taken what it wanted, and it would always be there, waiting for the next curious soul who dared to uncover the truth.